A millionaire took his son to a charity event, but a little orphan grabbed him and said, "I'm your real kid." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Sunshine Acres Orphanage. It was the annual fundraising gala, a glittering affair held under a massive white tent adorned with fairy lights and cascading floral arrangements. Henry Mason, a man whose tailored suit and silver hair spoke of quiet success, surveyed the scene with a practiced eye. He was a regular at these events, a generous benefactor who believed in giving back to the community that had supported his rise in the real estate world. Beside him stood his son, Ethan, a lanky teenager more comfortable in jeans and a hoodie than the crisp button-down shirt his father had insisted upon. "Try to look interested, Ethan," Henry murmured, his voice a low rumble. "These are important people. Networking is key." Ethan sighed, shoving his hands deeper into his pockets. "I know, Dad, but it's all just charity for show, isn't it? Everyone's here to pat themselves on the back." Henry's jaw tightened slightly. He understood Ethan's cynicism. It was a defense mechanism, a shield against the privilege he'd been born into. "It's more than that," Henry said, trying to keep his tone patient. "Sunshine Acres does good work. These kids need our help." He genuinely believed that. Henry had built his empire from the ground up, starting with nothing but ambition and a relentless work ethic. He knew the value of a helping hand, and he made it a point to support organizations that provided opportunities for those less fortunate. He had a soft spot for orphans, perhaps a subconscious echo of his own youthful struggles. The air was filled with the murmur of polite conversation, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the gentle strains of a string quartet. Henry mingled effortlessly, exchanging pleasantries with business associates, local politicians, and other philanthropists. He was in his element, a master of the social game. Ethan, meanwhile, trailed behind, looking increasingly bored. As Henry was deep in conversation with the mayor, a commotion erupted near the entrance of the tent. A small figure, a girl no older than 10, had darted past the security guards and was running towards him, her thin arms outstretched. She was a whirlwind of tangled brown hair and desperate energy, her eyes wide and tear-filled. "You!" she cried, her voice surprisingly loud. "You're him. You're my real father." The surrounding conversations died down. All eyes turned towards Henry and the girl, who was now clinging to his leg with surprising strength. Henry stared down at her, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. What are you talking about?" he stammered, trying to gently pry her hands away. "There's been a mistake." "No," she insisted, tears streaming down her face. "My mama, she told me. She said you were my father. She said her voice choked with sobs. Before she died, she told me to find you." The girl's raw emotion cut through the polite veneer of the gala. A hush fell over the crowd. Henry felt a cold dread creeping up his spine. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank, or worse, a desperate attempt at extortion. Ethan, who had been observing the scene with detached amusement, now looked genuinely concerned. "Dad, what's going on?" Henry shook his head, unable to find his voice. He looked around at the sea of curious faces, feeling the weight of their judgment. He needed to get this situation under control, and fast. "Excuse me," he said, his voice regaining some of its usual authority. He managed to detach the girl from his leg, but she remained close, her eyes fixed on his face. "Well, we'll sort this out. Come with me." He steered her towards a quieter corner of the tent, away from the prying eyes of the guests. Ethan followed close behind, his expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. Henry knelt down to the girl's level, trying to project an air of calm he didn't feel. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Lily," she whispered, sniffing back tears. "Lily Carter." "Lily," Henry repeated, the name unfamiliar and yet strangely resonant. "How old are you?" 10, she said. "Almost 11. 10. Almost 11. A date, a timeline, began to form in Henry's mind, a timeline that sent a shiver of apprehension through him. He needed to talk to someone who knew more about this girl, someone who could shed some light on this impossible situation. He needed to talk to the director of Sunshine Acres. Mrs. Davison, the director of Sunshine Acres, was a woman who exuded warmth and competence. Her office, a cozy space filled with children's drawings and overflowing bookshelves, felt like a sanctuary from the chaos of the gala. Henry sat across from her, Lily perched nervously on a chair beside him, while Ethan leaned against the doorframe, a silent observer. Mrs. Davison, Henry began, his voice tight with anxiety. This young lady, Lily, claims I'm her father. It's preposterous, of course, but I need to understand where this is coming from. Mrs. Davison regarded Lily with a gentle smile. Lily has been through a great deal, she said softly. Her mother, Sarah Carter, passed away a few months ago. It was a very difficult time for her. Her mother, Henry repeated, the name stirring a faint, almost forgotten memory. Did she ever mention anything about Lily's father? Mrs. Davison hesitated, her brow furrowing slightly. She did, she admitted. Sarah was a private woman, but she did tell me that Lily's father was a donor. She used a sperm bank many years ago. A sperm bank. The words hit Henry like a physical blow. A wave of nausea washed over him. He remembered, with sudden, sickening clarity, a period in his early 20s when he was struggling to make ends meet. He'd been a young, ambitious real estate agent, working long hours for little pay. He'd seen an advertisement for a sperm bank offering compensation for donors. It had seemed like easy money at the time, a way to pay off some bills and get ahead. He'd gone through the screening process, made a few donations, and then promptly forgotten about it. He'd never considered the possibility that those donations might actually result in a child. He'd certainly never imagined that he would come face to face with that child, years later, at a charity gala. Do you have any records? Henry asked, his voice barely a whisper. Anything that could confirm or deny this? Mrs. Davison nodded. We keep files on all our children, of course, but access to that information is strictly controlled. We need to protect their privacy. I understand, Henry said, but this is exceptional. I need to know the truth. He looked at Lily, her small face pale and anxious. He saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, a desperate yearning for connection. He couldn't dismiss her, not without knowing for sure. I'll see what I can do, Mrs. Davison said, her expression softening. But it may take some time. Henry knew that some time was an option. The story was already spreading like wildfire through the gala attendees. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. He decided to take matters into his own hands. That evening, after leaving Sunshine Acres, Henry contacted a private investigator he'd used before on business matters. He explained the situation, emphasizing the need for discretion and speed. I need you to find everything you can about Sarah Carter, Henry said, his voice firm. Her medical history, her connection to any sperm banks, and any records of a donor matching my profile. The investigator, a seasoned professional named Jack Reynolds, agreed to take the case. He understood the urgency of the situation. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and anticipation for Henry. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept returning to Lily and the possibility, the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that he might have a daughter he never knew. Ethan, initially skeptical and even resentful of Lily's intrusion, began to show a flicker of curiosity. He peppered Henry with questions, trying to make sense of the situation. Henry answered as honestly as he could, admitting his past mistakes and his growing sense of responsibility. Meanwhile, Henry started recalling his life when he was young. He remembered the small, cramped apartment he'd lived in, the constant struggle to make rent, the endless hours spent hustling for clients. He remembered the feeling of desperation that had driven him to the sperm bank, the sense that he was selling a part of himself for a few $100s. He'd never told anyone about it, not even his closest friends. It had been a shameful secret, a reminder of a time when he was vulnerable and desperate. Now, that secret was threatening to unravel his carefully constructed life. The phone call from Jack Reynolds came late one afternoon. Henry was in his office, staring out the window at the city skyline, lost in thought. Mr. Mason, Reynolds said, his voice crisp and businesslike. I have some information for you. Henry's heart pounded in his chest. Tell me. I've located Sarah Carter's medical records, Reynolds said. She did indeed use a sperm bank, the very one you mentioned. And I've obtained the donor records from that time period. There's a match, Mr. Mason. A definitive match. The word were like a punch in the gut. A definitive match. I also found some personal documents. A journal with a few entries, pictures. Reynolds added. Henry had a daughter. A 10-year-old daughter named Lily. The reality of it crashed down on him. A wave of emotion that left him breathless. The manila envelope sat on Henry's desk, thick with the weight of the past. Inside were the contents of Jack Reynolds' investigation. Copies of Sarah Carter's medical records, the sperm bank donor records, and a few pages torn from a worn journal. There was also a photograph, a faded Polaroid of a younger Henry, his hair longer, his smile more carefree. He was holding a real estate sold sign, a triumphant grin on his face. Henry stared at the photograph, a ghost of his former self staring back at him. He remembered that day, the first significant sale he'd made. He'd felt like he was on top of the world, invincible. He'd had no idea that, at the same time, he was unknowingly creating a life, a daughter he wouldn't meet for another decade. He opened the journal pages, his hands trembling slightly. Sarah's handwriting was delicate and looping, her words filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Entry 1. Today, I made the decision. I'm going to do it. I'm going to have a baby on my own. It feels scary, but also exhilarating. I long for a child, a family of my own. Entry 2. The clinic was sterile, impersonal, but the staff were kind. I chose donor number 147. He sounded intelligent, healthy. I hope he's a good man. Entry 3. I'm pregnant. I can't believe it. It's really happening. I'm going to be a mother. I'm terrified and overjoyed, all at the same time. I pray I can give this child a good life. Henry felt a lump forming in his throat. He could almost hear Sarah's voice, feel her longing for a child. He'd been a nameless, faceless donor, a number on a chart. But to her, he'd been the key to fulfilling her dream. He looked at the DNA test results, the irrefutable scientific proof of his paternity. 99.999% probability. There was no denying it. Lily was his daughter. He thought of Lily, her bright eyes, her shy smile, her desperate plea at the gala. He'd been so quick to dismiss her, to assume the worst. He'd been so focused on protecting his own image, his own carefully constructed world, that he'd almost missed the most important connection of his life. He called Ethan into his office. His son had been hovering anxiously, sensing the gravity of the situation. Ethan, Henry said, his voice heavy with emotion, I need to tell you something. It's about Lily. He explained everything, showing Ethan the documents, the photograph, the journal entries. Ethan listened in stunned silence, his initial skepticism slowly giving way to a mixture of disbelief and awe. So, she's really your daughter? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My sister. Henry nodded. Yes, he said. She is. Ethan was silent for a long moment, processing the information. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. Wow, he said. That's kind of amazing, actually. Henry was surprised by Ethan's reaction. He'd expected resistance, resentment, perhaps even anger. But Ethan seemed genuinely intrigued by the prospect of having a sister. I want to meet her again, Henry said. Properly this time. I want to tell her the truth. Ethan nodded. Yeah, he said. Me too. They arranged a meeting at Sunshine Acres, this time in a private room, away from the prying eyes of the other children and staff. Mrs. Davison was there, her presence a reassuring constant. When Lily entered the room, her eyes were wary, her body tense. She looked from Henry to Ethan, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. Henry knelt down, meeting her gaze. Lily, he said, his voice soft and sincere, I know this has been confusing and upsetting for you, but I want you to know that I believe you. I know you're telling the truth. He took a deep breath. I'm your father, he said. I didn't know about you until a few days ago, but I know now. and I want to get to know you." Lily's eyes widened, tears welling up again. But this time, they were tears of relief, of joy. She launched herself into Henry's arms, hugging him tightly. "I knew it," she cried, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I knew you were my daddy." Henry held her close, feeling a surge of emotion he'd never experienced before. It was a mixture of guilt, regret, and an overwhelming sense of love. He'd missed the first 10 years of her life, but he was determined to make up for lost time. Ethan, standing awkwardly nearby, cleared his throat. "Hey, Lily," he said, a shy smile on his face. "Ai metan. I guess I'm your brother." Lily pulled away from Henry, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She looked at Ethan, her head tilted slightly. "You are?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah," he said. "It's kind of weird but cool, I guess." Lily giggled, a sound that filled the room with warmth. "Cool," she repeated. "Mrs. Davison smiled, her eyes moist. "This is a wonderful moment," she said. "A true blessing." Henry knew that this was just the beginning of a long and complex journey. There would be challenges, adjustments, and a lot of catching up to do. But he was ready. He was committed to being a father to Lily, to giving her the love and support she deserved. He was also committed to helping Ethan and Lily build a relationship, to forging a new family from the shattered pieces of the past. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Henry consulted with lawyers, initiating the legal process of acknowledging Lily as his daughter and starting the adoption proceedings. He wanted to make everything official, to give Lily the security and stability she deserved. He also spent hours talking to Lily, learning about her life at Sunshine Acres, her friends, her favorite subjects in school, art and reading, and her dreams for the future. She wanted to be a veterinarian. He discovered that she was a bright, resilient girl, with a quick wit and a compassionate heart. She had inherited her mother's artistic talent and Henry's determination. Lily, in turn, was fascinated by Henry's world. She peppered him with questions about his work, his travels, and his childhood. She was eager to learn everything about him, to fill in the gaps in her knowledge of her father. The biggest adjustment, however, was introducing Lily to Ethan and integrating her into their lives. The initial meeting at Sunshine Acres had been positive, but there were bound to be challenges. They were, after all, two teenagers from completely different backgrounds, suddenly thrown together as siblings. Henry arranged for them to spend time together, taking them to movies, amusement parks, and sporting events. He tried to create opportunities for them to bond, to find common ground. At first, there was a certain awkwardness, a hesitant dance of getting to know each other. Ethan, used to being an only child, was sometimes aloof and reserved. Lily, still grieving the loss of her mother and adjusting to her new life, was sometimes clingy and demanding of attention. But slowly, gradually, a connection began to form. They discovered a shared love of video games, a similar sense of humor, and a mutual respect for each other's differences. They started to tease each other, to share secrets, to act like siblings. One evening, Henry found them sprawled on the living room floor, playing a video game together, their laughter echoing through the house. He watched them, a warmth spreading through his chest. It was a scene he'd never imagined, a family he'd never thought he'd have. Henry also made an effort to connect with Lily about her mother. He knew that Sarah was a crucial part of Lily's identity, and he didn't want to erase her memory. He asked Lily to tell him stories about her mother, to share her favorite memories. Lily showed him photographs of Sarah, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She told him about their trips to the park, their bedtime stories, their shared love of baking cookies. Henry listened, his heart aching for the loss Lily had suffered. He also felt a profound respect for Sarah, for the way she had raised Lily on her own with love and strength. He wished he could have met her, thanked her for bringing Lily into the world. He made sure that Lily had a special place in her new room for her mother's belongings, a small shrine of photographs and cherished mementos. He wanted Lily to know that her mother would always be a part of her life, even though she was gone. The legal process of adoption was long and complicated, involving paperwork, interviews, and home visits. But Henry was determined to navigate it all, to make Lily officially a part of his family. Finally, after months of waiting, the day arrived. Henry, Ethan, and Lily stood before a judge in a small courtroom. The judge reviewed the documents, asked a few questions, and then smiled. "I hereby declare Lily Carter to be the legal daughter of Henry Mason," she announced, banging her gavel. "Congratulations." Lily jumped up and down, clapping her hands. "I'm a Mason," she exclaimed. "I'm Lily Mason." Henry hugged her tightly, his eyes filled with tears. Ethan, standing beside them, gave Lily a high five. It was official. They were a family. Moving Lily into Henry's spacious home was a significant transition. Lily had spent her entire life at Sunshine Acres, surrounded by other children and the familiar routines of the orphanage. Now, she was living in a luxurious house with two people she was still getting to know. Her bedroom was bigger than her entire dorm room at the orphanage. It was filled with new furniture, toys, and clothes, all carefully chosen by Henry and Ethan. Lily was overwhelmed by the sheer abundance of it all. She missed her friends at Sunshine Acres, the shared meals, the late-night talks. She missed the comforting presence of Mrs. Davison. Henry and Ethan tried their best to make her feel welcome, to ease her into her new life. They established family routines, having dinner together every night, watching movies on weekends, and going for walks in the park. But there were challenges. Lily was sometimes withdrawn, retreating into herself. She had nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night, crying for her mother. Henry realized that they needed professional help to navigate their complex emotions and build healthy relationships. He found a family therapist, Dr. Ramirez, a kind and experienced woman who specialized in adoption and grief counseling. The therapy sessions were initially awkward, with everyone hesitant to open up. But Dr. Ramirez created a safe space for them to express their feelings, to share their fears and anxieties. Henry talked about his guilt over his past actions, his regret at missing so many years of Lily's life. Ethan talked about his initial resistance to having a sister, his fear of losing his father's attention. Lily talked about her grief over her mother's death, her loneliness, and her struggle to adjust to her new life. Through therapy, they learned to communicate more effectively, to understand each other's perspectives, and to support each other through difficult times. They learned to be a family, not just in name, but in spirit. Lily slowly began to blossom. She excelled in school, making new friends and discovering a passion for art. She joined the school's soccer team, finding an outlet for her energy and competitive spirit. Ethan, too, underwent a transformation. He became more responsible, more compassionate, and more engaged in family life. He took on the role of a protective older brother, looking out for Lily and helping her navigate the challenges of adolescence. Henry, watching his children grow and thrive, felt a sense of fulfillment he'd never known before. He'd built a successful career, accumulated wealth and prestige. But none of it compared to the joy of being a father, of having a family to love and cherish. One year after the fateful gala at Sunshine Acres, Henry hosted a small gathering at his home. It was a celebration of their new family, a gathering of close friends and relatives. Lily, radiant in a new dress, greeted the guests with a confidence that had been absent a year ago. Ethan, no longer the sullen teenager, helped his father with the arrangements, engaging in conversation with the adults. As Henry looked around the room, at the faces of his children, his friends, and his extended family, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. He'd been given a second chance, a chance to right the wrongs of his past, a chance to build a family he'd never dreamed of. He raised his glass in a toast. To family, he said, his voice thick with emotion. To new beginnings, and to the unexpected blessings that life brings us. The guests raised their glasses in response, their cheers echoing through the house. It was a moment of perfect harmony, a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and the enduring bonds of family. He found his true family. Years flowed like a gentle river, each carrying its own current of joys, challenges, and quiet moments of reflection. Lily and Ethan blossomed into young adults, their individual paths diverging yet forever intertwined by the unique bond they shared. Henry, his silver hair now a crown of pure white, watched them with a pride that swelled beyond words. Ethan, inheriting his father's sharp business acumen, took the reins of the Mason real estate empire. He proved to be a natural leader, expanding the company's reach while maintaining the ethical principles Henry had instilled in him. He married a bright, ambitious lawyer named Sarah, a coincidence that always brought a smile to Henry's face, and they soon blessed Henry with 2 rambunctious grandsons. Lily, true to her childhood dream, pursued her passion for animals. She excelled in veterinary school, her innate empathy and gentle touch making her a natural healer. She opened a small clinic in a vibrant, up-and-coming neighborhood, focusing on providing affordable care to pets of low-income families. She hadn't married, but her life was full of love, the love of her animal patients, the love of her friends, and the enduring love of her family. Henry officially retired, found his days filled with a new kind of richness. He spent hours playing with his grandchildren, marveling at their boundless energy and innocent curiosity. He volunteered at Sunshine Acres, reading stories to the children and offering mentorship to the older ones. He often found himself sitting on the same bench where he'd first encountered Lily, a wave of bittersweet nostalgia washing over him. He often thought back to that fateful evening, the gala that had changed his life forever. He remembered the shock, the disbelief, the fear. He remembered the desperate look in Lily's eyes, the plea that had pierced his carefully constructed defenses. He realized that Lily's arrival hadn't just given him a daughter. It had given him a purpose, a depth of feeling he'd never known before. It had forced him to confront his past, to acknowledge his mistakes, and to become a better man. It had also brought Ethan out of his shell. It has given Ethan a true sibling relationship. He was grateful for Sarah Carter, the woman he'd never met, but who had given him the greatest gift imaginable. He made sure that Lily's clinic received generous annual donations, a silent tribute to the mother she had lost too soon. As he aged, Henry became more reflective, more aware of the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. He made sure to tell Lily and Ethan how much he loved them, how proud he was of them, every chance he got. He often sat on his balcony, overlooking the city skyline, and thought about his legacy. He'd built a successful business, accumulated wealth, and made a name for himself. But his true legacy, he realized, was his family. It was Lily and Ethan, his grandchildren, and the enduring bonds of love that connected them all. One warm evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Henry sat with Lily on the balcony. They were talking about her work at the clinic, about the challenges and rewards of caring for animals. "You know, Dad," Lily said, her voice soft, "I sometimes think about my mom. I wonder what she would think of all this." Henry smiled. "I think she would be very proud of you, Lily," he said. "And I think she would be grateful that you found your way to us." Lily leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture of affection that still warmed his heart after all these years. "I'm grateful too, Dad," she said, "for everything." Henry put his arm around her, feeling the familiar surge of love and protectiveness. He knew that his time was limited, that he wouldn't be around forever. But he also knew that his legacy would live on, in the hearts of his children and grandchildren, in the good work they did in the world. He looked out at the city lights, twinkling like a million distant stars. He felt a sense of peace, of contentment. He had lived a full life, a life filled with both challenges and triumphs. He had found love, forgiveness, and a family he never expected. And it all began with a little orphan girl, a desperate plea, and a truth that had changed his life forever. He was complete.